The rain fell in relentless sheets across the city streets, turning the evening into a blur of neon reflections and hurried footsteps. Nora pressed her son closer to her chest, feeling his small body shiver through the thin blanket she'd wrapped around him. At 7 years old, Finn weighed far too little, his face pale and drawn from the fever that had been burning through him for 3 days now. She stood in the shadow of Bella Knot, one of the city's most expensive restaurants, watching well-dressed couples hurry past under expensive umbrellas. The warm golden light spilling from the restaurant's windows felt like a mockery of her desperation. 3 days since she'd been evicted from their tiny apartment. 3 days since she'd lost her job at the diner when she'd had to leave early to take Finn to the emergency room. 3 days since their last real meal, Mama. Finn whispered against her neck, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm cold." Nora's heart clenched. She'd already sold everything she could. Her grandmother's wedding ring, her laptop, even her winter coat. The $23 in her pocket wouldn't cover a single appetizer at a place like this. But she was out of options. The shelter was full. The food banks were closed until Monday. And Finn needed medicine she couldn't afford. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and Nora watched as a tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, barely glancing at the rain as his driver held an umbrella over him. He moved with the confident stride of someone who had never known want, never felt the gnawing ache of an empty stomach or the terror of not knowing where to sleep. This was her chance, maybe her only chance. Nora stepped forward on trembling legs, still clutching Finn. "Excuse me, sir." The man paused, his hand on the restaurant's door handle. He turned, and she saw sharp green eyes in a face that might have been handsome, if not for the guarded expression he wore like armor. Marcus Blackwood. She recognized him from the business section of newspapers. She glimpsed at the library. One of the city's youngest billionaires, made his fortune in tech innovations. "Please," she said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to stay strong. "Just one meal. My son. He's sick, and we haven't eaten in." She swallowed hard, shame burning in her chest. "I'm not asking for money, just food. Please." Marcus's eyes moved from her face to the bundle in her arms, where Finn's fevered face peeked out from the blanket. For a moment, something flickered across his features, surprise, perhaps, or discomfort. Most people looked right through the homeless, she'd learned. They became invisible. "Just part of the urban landscape, ma'am. He began, his voice careful, measured. "I'll work for it," Nora interrupted, desperation making her bold. "I can clean, or wash dishes, or anything. I just need him to eat something warm. He's been running a fever for days, and I can't." Her voice cracked completely then, the weight of her helplessness crushing down on her chest. Marcus stood, frozen for a long moment, rain beginning to dampen his perfectly styled dark hair. She could see him calculating, weighing options the way successful men did. The smart thing would be to give her a 20 and walk away, salve his conscience without getting involved. That's what most people would do. Instead, he did something that surprised them both. He opened the restaurant door wider and stepped aside. "Comin', both of you." Nora stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? "You're soaked through, and your son needs to get warm," Marcus said, his tone brisk but not unkind. "Come inside." She hesitated, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her dark hair plastered to her head, her clothes damp and wrinkled from sleeping in the car before it was repossessed. The smell of desperation that seemed to cling to her skin. People like him didn't associate with people like her. "I don't have money for a place like this," she whispered. "I didn't ask if you did." His green eyes met hers steadily. "I asked you to come inside." Finn stirred in her arms, his fever-bright eyes opening to look at the stranger. To Nora's amazement, her shy son didn't shrink away. Instead, he studied Marcus with the solemn curiosity of a child who had learned too early that the world was not always kind. "Are you going to help us?" Finn asked in his small, hoarse voice. Something shifted in Marcus's expression then, the careful mask slipping just slightly. "Yeah, kid, I'm going to help you." The warmth of the restaurant hit them like a blessing as they stepped inside. Nora felt Finn relax against her as the heat began to penetrate the blanket. The Maître d' approached with barely concealed alarm. Clearly, They were not the usual clientele, but Marcus waved him off with a gesture that spoke of absolute authority. "My usual table," Marcus said simply, "and bring some soup for the boy, something mild." As they were led through the elegant dining room, Nora caught glimpses of other diners, women in designer dresses, men in suits that cost more than she used to make in a month. She felt their stares, some curious, some disdainful. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she held her head high for Finn's sake. Marcus pulled out a chair for her, a gesture so automatic and genteel that it nearly brought tears to her eyes. When was the last time someone had shown her such simple courtesy? "What's your name?" he asked as they settled at the table. "Nora," she said quietly, "Nora Chen. And this is Finn." "Marcus." He studied them both with those sharp green eyes. "When did you last eat, Nora?" The question was asked without judgment, but she felt the shame of it anyway. "Yesterday morning. Some crackers from a gas station." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When the waiter approached, he ordered enough food for a small army. Soup, bread, pasta, vegetables, and a child-sized portion of chicken that made Finn's eyes widen with hope. "You don't have to do all this," Nora said, overwhelmed by his kindness to strangers. "Maybe not," Marcus replied, watching as Finn reached tentatively for a piece of warm bread. "But I want to." As her son began to eat with the careful, desperate hunger of someone who had learned not to take food for granted, Nora felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. She didn't know why this wealthy stranger had chosen to help them, but as she watched Finn's color slowly return and felt warmth seeping back into her own bones, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, their luck was finally changing. Marcus watched them eat in thoughtful silence, and Nora wondered what he was thinking. She couldn't have imagined that this simple act of kindness would be the first step toward changing all their lives forever. The soup arrived first, steam rising from the bowl like a promise of comfort. Finn's eyes widened as the waiter placed it before him, and Nora had to gently guide his eager hands to prevent him from burning himself on the hot ceramic. Slowly. "Sweetheart," she murmured, brushing his damp hair back from his forehead. His fever seemed to be breaking already, just from getting out of the cold. Marcus watched the tender exchange with an expression Nora couldn't quite read. There was something almost wistful in his eyes, as if he were witnessing something foreign yet deeply moving. "How old are you, Finn?" Marcus asked, leaning forward slightly. Finn looked up from his soup, a drop clinging to his chin. 7. "But I'll be 8 next month." He paused, then added with heartbreaking honesty, "If we have a place to live by then." The words hung in the air between them. Nora felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Marcus simply nodded as if homelessness were a perfectly normal topic of dinner conversation. "What happened?" he asked Nora directly. "How did you end up on the streets?" Nora hesitated, stirring her own soup to avoid his penetrating gaze. Most people didn't really want to know. They asked out of politeness or morbid curiosity, but they weren't prepared for the messy reality of how quickly a life could unravel. "I worked at Romano's diner," she began quietly. "Double shifts most days. Finn's father. He left when Finn was 2. Said he wasn't ready for the responsibility." She took a shaky breath. "I was doing okay, not great, but okay. Then Finn got sick with pneumonia last month. Really sick. I had to take time off work to stay with him in the hospital." Marcus's expression darkened. "They fired you for taking care of your sick child. They said I was unreliable, that they needed someone who could commit to their schedule." The bitterness crept into her voice despite her efforts to stay neutral. "Without the job, I couldn't make rent. The landlord gave me 2 weeks, but..." She shrugged helplessly. "You can't find work and an apartment in 2 weeks when you have no savings and a child to care for." Elena Rossetti, the restaurant's owner, approached their table with concern etched on her weathered face. She was a woman in her 60s who had built Bella not from nothing, and she had the kind eyes of someone who understood struggle. "Marcus, is everything all right here?" she asked, but her gaze was on Finn, who was methodically working his way through his second bowl of soup. "Elena, meet Nora and Finn," Marcus said. "They're my guests tonight." Elena's experienced eyes took in their situation immediately: the damp clothes, The way Nora held herself with dignity despite her circumstances, the careful way Finn ate, as if afraid the food might disappear. Her expression softened. "Bambino," she said to Finn, "are you still hungry? I have some fresh bread in the kitchen, and maybe some gelato." Finn nodded eagerly, and Elena bustled away with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades feeding people. "You have a kind staff," Nora observed. "Elena's not staff. She owns this place," Marcus said. "And she has a soft spot for kids. Lost her own grandson a few years ago." As the evening progressed and more food arrived, Nora found herself relaxing. Despite the surreal nature of the situation, Marcus asked careful questions about Finn's interests, learning that the boy loved to draw and had dreams of becoming an artist someday. He spoke to Finn with genuine attention, not the condescending tone many adults used with children. "Where will you go tonight?" Marcus asked eventually, the question Nora had been dreading. "There's a 24-hour laundromat a few blocks from here," she said quietly. "It's warm, and they don't kick you out if you're quiet." Marcus was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were having an internal debate. Finally, he pulled out his phone and made a brief call. "James, it's Marcus. I need you to prepare the guest suite." "No, it's fine. Just make sure it's ready within the hour." "Thanks." He hung up and turned back to them. "You're not spending another night on the streets." Nora's heart began to race. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate what you've done, but I can't accept." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "I have a guest suite that hasn't been used in months. Finn needs a proper bed and a safe place to recover from his illness. We're strangers." Nora protested weakly. "You don't know anything about us. I know you're a mother who would do anything for her child. I know you're proud enough to work for food rather than just ask for handouts. And I know that child deserves better than sleeping in a laundromat." His green eyes met hers steadily. "Sometimes that's enough." Finn tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mama, can we? I'm so tired." The exhaustion in her son's voice broke down her last resistance. "Just for tonight," she whispered. Marcus's penthouse apartment was unlike anything Nora had ever seen outside of movies. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a design magazine. But despite its obvious expense, it felt oddly impersonal, like a beautiful hotel room rather than a home. James, Marcus's assistant, had indeed prepared the guest suite, a spacious room, with its own bathroom and a bed large enough for both Nora and Finn. Clean towels were stacked on the dresser, and someone had thoughtfully left out a selection of toiletries. "There are some clothes in the closet that might fit," Marcus said, hovering in the doorway. "My sister Grace left them here ages ago. She's about your size." Finn was already exploring the room with wonder, touching the soft comforter and peering out the window at the city spread below them. For the first time in weeks, he looked like the child he was supposed to be rather than a tiny adult carrying the weight of the world. "Why are you doing this?" Nora asked when Finn was distracted by the view. Marcus was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "My parents died when I was 12. Car accident. I went to live with my uncle, but he was difficult, cold. I spent a lot of nights hungry and scared, and no one helped. Maybe if someone had." He trailed off, then met her eyes. "Let's just say I know what it feels like to need someone to care." That night, as Finn slept peacefully beside her in the impossibly soft bed, Nora stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was dreaming. Tomorrow, she would insist on leaving. She would find a way to make it on her own, as she always had. But for tonight, wrapped in warmth and safety, she allowed herself to rest. Down the hall, Marcus stood at his office window, looking out at the city and thinking about the last time his apartment had felt this alive. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone with his thoughts and his guilt, and surprisingly, he found he didn't want to be. The morning sun streamed through the guest room windows, waking Nora to the sound of her son's laughter, a sound she hadn't heard in weeks. She sat up, momentarily disoriented by the luxurious surroundings, before the events of the previous evening came flooding back. Finn was no longer beside her, following the sound of voices. She found him in the kitchen with Marcus, who was showing him how to flip pancakes on a griddle that probably cost more than her old monthly. Rent. Mama, Finn called excitedly when he saw her. Marcus is teaching me to cook. Look. He held up a slightly lopsided pancake with enormous pride. Marcus looked up from the stove, and Nora was struck by how different he seemed in casual clothes. Jeans and a simple gray sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. His dark hair was mussed, and there was flour on his cheek that he seemed unaware of. "Good morning," he said, his voice softer than it had been in the restaurant. "I hope we didn't wake you." Finn was up early, and he said he was hungry. "You didn't have to," Nora began, then stopped herself. She was tired of apologizing, tired of feeling like a burden. Instead, she said, "Thank you, both of you." They ate breakfast together at the kitchen island, Finn chattering about everything he'd seen in the apartment, while Nora and Marcus listened with amused attention. The boy's fever had completely broken, and his natural curiosity was returning, along with his health. "I should call some shelters today," Nora said eventually, the words heavy with reluctance. "See if anything's opened up." Marcus set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Why?" "Because we can't stay here indefinitely. You've been incredibly kind. But what? You think I'm going to throw you out?" There was an edge to his voice that surprised her. "Finn's just starting to feel better. You both need time to recover and figure out your next steps properly. We're not your responsibility, Marcus. Maybe not. But you're here now, and He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly uncertain. "When was the last time this place felt like anything other than an expensive storage unit for my stuff?" Before Nora could respond, the apartment's security system chimed, announcing a visitor. Marcus's expression immediately shuddered, the warm man from breakfast disappearing behind a mask of polite indifference. "That'll be Grace," he said, standing abruptly. "My sister. I forgot she was coming by today." The woman who entered the apartment a few minutes later was stunning in the way that only money and excellent genetics could produce. Grace Blackwood was tall and elegant, with the same green eyes as Marcus but softer features. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her designer dress probably cost more than Nora had made in 6 months at the diner. "Marcus, darling, you look." Grace paused mid-sentence when she spotted Nora and Finn in the kitchen. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose in surprise. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Nora felt the familiar burn of shame creep up her neck as Grace's appraising gaze took in her borrowed clothes and obvious status as someone who didn't belong in this world. "Grace, this is Nora and her son Finn," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "They're staying here for a while." "I see." Grace's smile was polite, but cold. "How unexpected." Finn, oblivious to the undercurrents, approached Grace with his characteristic directness. "Are you Marcus's sister? You have the same eyes. Do you know how to make pancakes too?" Grace's carefully composed expression faltered slightly at Finn's innocent question. She looked down at the boy, and something in her face softened just a fraction. "I'm afraid I don't cook much, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentler than it had been moments before. "That's okay. Marcus is teaching me. Want to see?" Without waiting for an answer, Finn grabbed Grace's manicured hand and tugged her toward the kitchen. Over the next hour, Nora watched in fascination as Finn worked his unconscious magic on Grace, the woman who had entered the apartment like an ice queen gradually thawed under the boy's eager attention. She admired his drawings, listened to his stories about wanting to be an artist, and even laughed when he got pancake batter on her expensive dress. Marcus watched the interaction with an expression of bemused surprise, as if seeing his sister in a new light. "She's different with him," Nora observed quietly when they found themselves alone for a moment. "Grace has always wanted children," Marcus said, "but her husband, let's just say he has other priorities. She's been trying for years." The pain in his voice made Nora look at him more closely. There were depths to Marcus Blackwood that she was only beginning to glimpse, layers beneath the successful businessman facade. Later, when Grace was preparing to leave, she pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. Nora couldn't hear their words, but she could see the intensity of their discussion. The way Grace kept glancing back at Finn with something that looked almost like longing. After Grace left, Marcus was quieter than usual. He spent the afternoon in his home office while Nora helped Finn with the art project. Using supplies Marcus had somehow procured from somewhere in his vast apartment. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, takeout from a nearby Chinese restaurant, because Marcus had insisted Nora didn't need to cook, he finally spoke about his sister's visit. "Grace thinks I'm having a midlife crisis," he said with a wry smile, "bringing home strays." As she put it, Nora felt her cheeks flush. "Is that what we are, strays?" Marcus looked up from his low mien, his green eyes serious. "No, you're..." He paused as if searching for the right words. "You're the first real thing that's happened to me in years." The sincerity in his voice made Nora's heart skip a beat. She was saved from having to respond by Finn's excited interruption. "Marcus, can we watch a movie tonight, on that big TV? I promise I'll go to bed right after." "Of course." "Buddy, what do you want to watch?" As they settled onto the massive sectional sofa, Finn between them, his small body warm and trusting, Nora realized something had shifted. This didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt like they were building something, the three of them. Something fragile but real. Marcus's arm stretched across the back of the couch, not quite touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. When Finn fell asleep halfway through the movie, his head pillowed on Marcus's lap. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he gently stroked the boy's hair with surprising tenderness. "He trusts you," Nora whispered. "He's easy to love," Marcus replied quietly. And the simple honesty of the statement made Nora's chest tight with emotion. That night, as she tucked Finn into bed, he asked the question she'd been dreading. "Mama, can we stay here?" "With Marcus, I like it here. I feel safe. I don't know." "Sweetheart," she said, kissing his forehead, "we'll see." But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet sounds of the city far below and feeling more rested than she had in months, Nora found herself hoping that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make this work. Down the hall, Marcus stared at his bedroom ceiling and wondered when exactly he'd started thinking of his apartment as home, instead of just the place where he slept. The answer, he realized, was the moment Nora and Finn had walked into it. 3 weeks had passed since that rainy night outside Bella Knot, and the rhythms of their unconventional household had settled into something that felt almost natural. Finn had claimed the guest room as his own, decorating the walls with his drawings and filling the space with the cheerful chaos only a child could create. Nora had stopped talking about leaving, though Marcus noticed she still kept their few belongings neatly packed, as if ready to flee at a moment's notice. Marcus found himself coming home earlier each day, drawn by the sounds of life that now filled his apartment. Finn's laughter, Nora humming while she cooked, the soft murmur of bedtime stories. His assistant James had started scheduling fewer evening meetings, understanding without being told that his boss's priorities had shifted. "You've been distracted lately," James observed as they walked through the offices of Blackwood Technologies. That morning, the Henderson account, the merger talks with Pacific Systems. "You're usually completely focused during negotiations like these." Marcus paused at his office door, keys in hand. "Am I losing my edge?" "No. You're gaining perspective," James said with a knowing smile. "It's about time." The truth was, Marcus had been thinking about offering Nora a job at his company. She was clearly intelligent, resourceful, and had a quiet strength that impressed him daily. But he also knew the complications it would create, the appearance of impropriety, the power imbalance, the gossip that would inevitably follow. He wanted to help her build independence, not create a situation where she felt beholden to him. That afternoon, he made a decision. "I have an idea," he said when he arrived home to find Nora helping Finn with a homework packet one of the local schools had provided. "There's a position opening in our customer relations department. It's entry level, but it has growth potential, good benefits, and flexible hours for parents." Nora looked up from the math problems she'd been reviewing, wariness immediately creeping into her expression. "Marcus, I can't, before you say no, hear me out," he interrupted gently. "This isn't charity. We're genuinely short-staffed in that department, and you have the people skills for the job. You'd be interviewing with the department head, Not me. It would be completely legitimate. But everyone would know, Nora said quietly. They'd know I'm the woman you picked up off the streets. They'd know you're someone who impressed me enough to recommend for a position. Marcus corrected. Your past doesn't define your qualifications. Finn looked up from his math sheet. Mama, does this mean we could stay here? Really stay? The hope in her son's voice was almost painful to hear. Nora's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed his hair back. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Why not? Finn asked with the direct logic of childhood. Marcus likes us, and we like him. And this place is big enough for all of us, Marcus felt. His heart constrict at the boy's innocent observation. From Finn's perspective, it really was that simple. Love, space, and mutual affection should be enough to build a family on. It was only the adult complications, fear, pride, past hurts, that made it complex. That evening, after Finn had gone to bed, Marcus found Nora on the apartment's terrace. Looking out over the city lights, she'd changed into one of Grace's dresses. A simple blue sundress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes and made her look younger, less burdened. Penny for your thoughts, he said, joining her at the railing. I keep waiting for the catch, she said without preamble. For the moment when you realize what you've gotten yourself into and ask us to leave. Marcus turned to face her fully. What would it take to convince you that's not going to happen? I don't know, she admitted. I've been on my own for so long, Marcus. Even when Finn's father was around, I couldn't really depend on him. He was charming and fun, but when things got difficult, she shrugged. I learned not to count on anyone but myself. I'm not him, Marcus said quietly. I know you're not. That's what scares me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Because if I let myself believe this is real, if I let myself care about you, and then it falls apart, it won't fall apart. You can't promise that. Nobody can. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. You're right. I can't promise that life won't throw us curveballs or that we won't face challenges, but I can promise that I won't walk away just because things get difficult. I'm not built that way. Nora studied his face in the soft glow of the city lights. How do I know that? Because I'm still here, he said simply. 3 weeks ago, you were a stranger, asking for help. I could have given you money for a meal and walked away feeling good about my charitable deed. Instead, I brought you home. I've rearranged my schedule around Finn's bedtime. I've learned to make pancakes and how to untangle art supplies from throw pillows. He smiled softly. I'm still here because I choose to be every day. Something in Nora's expression began to soften. Finn adores you. The feeling is mutual. He's an incredible kid, Nora. You've raised him to be kind and curious and resilient despite everything you've both been through. He needs stability, a real home. He is one. Here, with us. The word has hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Nora felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of maybe, finally, not having to carry everything alone. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I, Marcus admitted. I've been alone for a long time too. I'd convinced myself I preferred it that way. But these past few weeks, he reached out, gently taking her hand. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone to come home to. His thumb traced across her knuckles, and Nora felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the mild evening air. When she looked up at him, she saw her own tentative hope reflected in his green eyes. The job offer, she said finally, it's really legitimate, completely. Though I have to warn you, Sharon Martinez runs a tight ship in customer relations. She'll expect your best work. And if this thing between us doesn't work out, then you'll still have a job and a reference from one of the city's most respected companies. Marcus said firmly, your professional life and your personal life don't have to be connected. Nora nodded slowly. It was a risk. Everything worthwhile was a risk. But for the first time in years, she felt like she had someone in her corner, someone who wanted to see her succeed, not for what she could give him, but simply because he cared about her happiness. Okay, she said. I'll take the interview. Marcus's smile was brilliant. Really, really. But Marcus, she stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold In his green eyes, "I need you to know that. If I do this, if I let myself trust this, I'm all in. I don't do anything halfway, especially when it comes to Finn's well-being." "Neither do I," he said solemnly. She believed him. For the first time in her adult life, Nora allowed herself to lean on someone else's strength. When Marcus's arms came around her, pulling her close against his chest, she didn't fight it. She let herself be held, let herself feel safe and cherished. "And home, we're really doing this," she murmured against his shirt. "We're really doing this," he confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Inside the apartment, Finn stirred in his sleep and smiled, somehow sensing even in dreams that his little family was finally, truly complete. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of what had once been Marcus's sterile penthouse and was now unmistakably a family home. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Books were stacked on every available surface, and a small bicycle stood in the corner of the living room, evidence of Finn's growing confidence and joy in his new life. Nora stood at the bathroom mirror, her hands shaking slightly as she fastened a delicate silver necklace, a gift from Marcus for her first successful quarter in the customer relations department. At Blackwood Technologies, she hardly recognized herself in the mirror. Gone was the desperate, hollow-eyed woman who had begged for scraps outside a restaurant. In her place stood someone confident and radiant, wearing a simple but elegant white dress that Grace had helped her choose. "Mama, you look like a princess." Finn burst into the room, his hair neatly combed and his small body dressed in a navy suit that made him look impossibly grown-up. "Thank you, sweetheart." Nora knelt down to straighten his tie, her heart full to bursting. "Are you excited about today? Are you kidding? I get to be Marcus's best man." Finn's grin was infectious. Well, co-best man with Uncle James, but still, the title Uncle James had evolved naturally over the past few months. Marcus's assistant had become not just a friend, but an integral part of their unconventional family, often joining them for dinners and weekend outings. His initial, professional interest in his boss's welfare had transformed into genuine affection for all three of them. "Is Marcus nervous?" Nora asked, checking her appearance one more time. "He threw up twice this morning," Finn reported with 8-year-old honesty. "But he said that was normal for grooms." Nora laughed, her own nervous energy settling slightly. The small ceremony would take place in the rooftop garden of Bella Knott, Elena having insisted on hosting their wedding reception. It would be intimate, just Grace, James, Elena, and a few close friends Marcus had accumulated over the years. Nora had no family to invite, but that no longer felt like a loss. She had everything she needed right here. A soft knock on the bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Can I come in?" Grace's voice called. "Of course." Grace entered looking elegant as always, but her expression was softer than it had been that first day 6 months ago. Finn's persistent charm had worked its magic on her, and she had become the devoted aunt he'd never had, spoiling him with art supplies and museum trips and genuine affection. "You look absolutely beautiful," Grace said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Marcus is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Nora replied, meaning it completely. Grace handed her a small wrapped box. "Something borrowed, something blue," she said with a smile. "These were our mother's earrings. Marcus wanted you to have them, but he was too nervous to give them to you himself." Nora opened the box to reveal delicate sapphire earrings that caught the light like captured stars. "Grace, I can't." "You can, and you will," Grace interrupted, echoing her brother's words from that first night. "You're family now, Nora. This is what family does." As Grace helped her fasten the earrings, Nora thought about how much had changed in such a short time. Her job at Blackwood Technologies had led to a promotion within 3 months, her natural empathy and problem-solving skills making her invaluable to the customer relations team. More importantly, she had found her confidence again, her sense of worth that had nothing to do with the man she was about to marry. "Are you ready?" Grace asked, offering her arm. "I've been ready for months," Nora replied. The rooftop garden at Bella Knott had been transformed into something magical. String lights twinkled overhead, and Elena had filled every available space with flowers, white roses, and baby's breath that perfumed the evening air. The sun was beginning to set, casting everything in golden light that made the city skyline look like a fairy tale backdrop. Marcus stood at the makeshift altar, resplendent in a charcoal gray suit, his dark hair perfectly styled and his green eyes bright with anticipation when he saw Nora approaching on Grace's arm. His face lit up with such pure joy that several guests openly dabbed at their eyes. Finn scampered ahead of them, carefully carrying the rings on a small pillow with the serious concentration of someone entrusted with a very important job. He took his place beside Marcus, beaming with pride at his role in the ceremony. The officiant was a friend of Marcus's from college, now a judge, who had agreed to perform the simple ceremony. As Nora took her place beside Marcus, he reached for her hands, and she felt the last of her nervousness melt away. "Dearly beloved," the judge began, but Nora barely heard the traditional words. She was lost in Marcus's eyes, in the absolute certainty she saw there, in the promise of the life they were about to officially begin together. When it came time for their personal vows, Marcus spoke first, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Nora, 6 months ago, you walked into my life asking for nothing more than a meal for your son. You gave me something I didn't even know I was missing, a family, a purpose, a reason to come home each day. You've taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It's about choosing each other every day, in the small moments and the difficult ones. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your greatest supporter for all the days of my life." Nora's own vows came from the heart, unrehearsed but deeply felt. "Marcus, you saw me at my lowest point and chose to see not what I lacked, but what I had to offer. You gave me safety when I had given up hope, opportunity when I thought I had none, and love when I thought I was undeserving of it. You've shown Finn what it means to have a father who will never abandon him, and you've shown me what it means to be truly partnership. I promise to love you not just in the easy times, but especially in the challenging ones, because that's when love matters most," when the judge pronounced them husband and wife. Marcus's kiss was tender and full of promise. The small gathering erupted in cheers, but the loudest voice belonged to Finn, who threw his arms around both of them and declared, "We're a real family now." "We were always a real family, buddy," Marcus said, scooping the boy up in his arms. "Now we just have the paperwork to prove it." The reception was everything Nora had dreamed of but never dared hope for: intimate, warm, and filled with people who genuinely cared about their happiness. Elena had outdone herself with the food, and even the usually reserved James gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. As the evening wound down and their guests began to say their goodbyes, Nora found herself on the terrace with Marcus, swaying to music that drifted from inside the restaurant. Finn had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was sleeping peacefully on a couch inside, his suit jacket carefully folded beside him. "So, Mrs. Blackwood," Marcus murmured against her ear, "how does it feel to be married to a billionaire?" "I don't know," Nora replied with a smile. "How does it feel to be married to the best customer relations specialist in the city?" Marcus laughed, the sound rich and happy. "Like I won the lottery twice, once when you agreed to stay, and again when you agreed to marry me. You know what the best part is?" Nora asked, looking over at Finn's sleeping form. "He'll never remember a time when he didn't feel safe and loved. That fear, that uncertainty we lived with for so long, that's not part of his story anymore." "It's not part of your story anymore either," Marcus said softly, as they danced under the stars, surrounded by the city lights that had once seemed so cold and distant. Nora marveled at the journey that had brought them here, from desperation to hope, from survival to thriving, from 3 separate souls to one unified family. The homeless woman who had begged for scraps was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to accept love and give it freely in return. The lonely billionaire who had hidden from life in his sterile penthouse had been transformed into a husband and father who found his greatest joy in Sunday morning pancakes and bedtime stories. And Finn, who had learned too early that the world could be cruel and uncertain, now slept peacefully knowing that he was cherished, protected, and home. "Just one meal," Marcus said quietly, echoing the words that had started it all. "Just one meal," Nora agreed, and everything changed. As they held each other close, with their son sleeping safely nearby and their future stretching bright before them. They knew that some bargains made in desperation could lead to the greatest blessings of all. Love, it turned out, was not something that could be bought or negotiated or earned through suffering. Sometimes it was simply given freely, and that made all the difference in the world. Their story would become legendary among the staff at Bellanot, the tale of the desperate mother, the generous stranger, and the little boy who helped them both find their way home. But for Marcus, Nora, and Finn, it wasn't a story at all. It was simply the beginning of their happily ever after.